Okay, Brands Hatch bogey section. By the amount of people who asked about just every single corner on the track, I think you all need to rush out and buy my guide. However, Paddock Hill seemed to be the one most people wanted to know about. So here it is, Brands Hatch, Paddock Hill, done my way. To help, I'm going to drop in aerial shots showing the line, approach line, apexes and so on. And the line itself is going to be in different colours to show what I'm actually doing on the line at that point in time. Red will indicate braking area. Yellow will be just a closed throttle. Orange will be where I either pick the throttle up or part throttle. And green is where I'm genuinely accelerating and onto the straights, etc. Okay, running over the start-finish line to turn one. Paddock Hill, or turn one, is one of the most awesome corners you're likely to ever encounter. It's a very high-speed approach. The straight itself, running down towards turn one through the start-finish area, is called Bramham Straight. And you're approaching effectively a rise in the circuit, and then as you're approaching the apex, the circuit drops very steeply down into the bottom, and that's called Paddock Hill. Crossing the start-finish line, we want to be over to the left-hand side of the track, and full gas as we're approaching the start-finish line itself, which is just here, and the start marshal boxes to our right. At this point in time, we're actually keeping over to the left, so we're in the best position because we're obviously coming to a right-hander. We're looking now for our braking reference, and on a superbike or a stock 1000, which I'm on here, we're looking for this gantry tower here on the right. So as we're approaching that point, we'll come into the braking area, and the brake light here will show us that we're now braking. Now, we're going up a slight rise here. There's a slight kink before we actually get to Paddock Hill itself, the corner. Because we're actually braking really hard at this point, we want to try and keep the bike up while we're braking. And it's one of the reasons during this point, we're over to the left-hand side of the track. At this point in time, we're now looking for this marshal post in the distance. That's our aim point. And the reason for that is largely because if you stay on the left-hand side of the track, our braking is effectively round that curve. Where if we depart from the left-hand side of the track and aim for that marshal's post, our braking is much more upright. And because of the curve of the circuit, we will eventually meet the edge of the track again over the rise. So our aim point is that marshal's post. Extremely heavy braking at this point. And again, we're aiming for that marshal's post. As you can see, we're starting to pull away in towards the middle of the track. This is one of the highest points of the circuit. We're effectively going over a rise. What we're looking for now is our tipping point, or the point where we have to commit to the corner itself. So we're actually looking now for this 100 meter or 1 mark, which is going to be our tipping point. As we're approaching that, there's a few things which can help us here. We're still doing 120, 130 miles an hour as we're getting to this point. So the corner's really starting to come at you. And because of the rise, we still can't see the corner. So you really need to be very positive and confident where you are on the track at this point and be proactive to know what you need to do before you get there. So we're looking for the 100 meter mark here, and the blend line out of the pits comes in from our right here. Now, as we're getting towards the 1 mark, where we have to really start to commit, because this is, from this point onwards, is where the corner genuinely really starts. So we have to be in the right place to commit our entry into the corner. Now, at this point of the track, it seems very obvious and very easy, and you can get sucked in if you start to panic a little bit to cross this blend line to get us towards where we think our apex is. However, the apex itself is an awful long way around the corner still. It's almost halfway down the hill itself towards Paddock Hill bottom. So what our aim here is to keep on out towards the marshal's post, and we want to then start our turn. So if you look at where the blend line is and the edge of the tarmac, roughly in the middle of that is our ideal point to get a nice late apex down the hill. So as we're approaching that point, you can see now by the angle of lean, the bike's committed to the corner. Now, because of the corners started and the drop itself is really starting to steepen up now, we're actually starting to drop downhill. From the voice of experience here, it's quite easy if you hang onto the brake too long for the front end to fold, because effectively with us going over the rise, we're starting to lose a little bit of weight. So you really need at this point to be easing back on the brake. You can trail it for a while, but you really need to get off the brake. So as we're starting to close in on our right-hand curb here, the apex still hasn't come into view effectively for us. As we're closing the right-hand curb, off the brakes and leave the throttle closed and allow the bike to turn in towards what is the apex. Now you can see the bottom of the dip here, so that's our ultimate aim point, but we're still looking for the apex of the corner, which is roughly where these two splodges of concrete are, just the other side of the curb. Now the curbs at Brands aren't very wide and generally speaking aren't very good to use. I would suggest stay off them to a large degree. The exception is the bottom of the hill here. You can run across that one. Now at this point we're on effectively the steepest part of the hill, right at the apex of the corner, and this is the point where I would suggest to start picking up the throttle to just balance the bike up, take a bit of weight off the front wheel, get some weight on the back wheel to get the bike nice and steady, because the next thing we're going to start to do is try and accelerate down the hill. Now you can't go full gas at this point because the bike is still quite light on its feet and it feels like you're sort of slithering about at this point, you're desperate for grip. So feed the throttle on progressively, and by the time you get to the bottom of the dip here, we should be pretty much on full gas. Now in the bottom of the dip, you feel what happens here is because you've gone into the bottom of a dip and then you start to go at Pilgrim's Rise up to turn 2. What you find here is the bike bottoms out, the tyres get squashed, you run back to the bottom of the suspension, and the bike feels like you've hit like a patch of ice, and the bike feels like it slithers around some. Nothing to worry too much about, keep it pinned. We're now going to start running up the hill, Pilgrim's Rise, up towards turn 2. Get on board for just $5 a month to see my exclusive content. But if you like what I do, you can subscribe on higher tiers for greater rewards.